Chapter 31, Seeking Another Buyer. Last time, Zhuangcheng had taken her on a bike ride, and Xia Xiaolan had realized how tiring it was to cycle to Shangdushi. Since she arrived in 1983, exhaustion had become the norm. Yesterday, she hadn't entered the city, and she had cycled to more than 20 villages, collecting over 50 pounds of eels. Xia Xiaolan's task for the day was to sell several hundred eggs she had collected while selling the eels. As the busiest days of rice harvesting had passed, there were fewer people willing to buy eggs. Plus, she had covered a vast area, with Shaojing village as the center, and people from several dozen villages had already made multiple trips to collect eggs, taking their time. Once she sold these hundreds of eggs, she could focus on reselling the eels. These eels had already grown significantly and were hiding in the rice fields and ditches. Xia Xiaolan thought about what she could bring back to the countryside from Shangdushi to draw money from the rural residents. In the current rural areas, purchasing power was quite low. Apart from essentials like salt, most people held on to every penny tightly. Even oil wasn't something they bought regularly. Many households could go through an entire year spending money only on salt, and going without soy sauce and oil was manageable, but going without salt would leave them weak. Xia Xiaolan thought for a while, but couldn't come up with any ideas. She rode her bike to the first eel noodle shop. "Comrade, do you still need eels today?" She tried to sound more serious, but her voice was naturally sweet, and as soon as she greeted them, everyone in the noodle shop turned to look at her. Young people recovered quickly. The wound on Xia Xiaolan's forehead had long since scabbed over and left a faint pink scar. Although she didn't wear makeup or dress up, she was naturally attractive, and it was rare to see such a pretty girl. She waited for a while in place, but the person who came out wasn't the owner who had bought eels from her last time. It was a middle-aged woman with an unfriendly tone who said, "We don't need eels today. We have a long-term supplier. Don't come here again." "But why don't you understand plain language, comrade? We don't want the eels you bring. Our shop doesn't want your eels." The middle-aged woman's tone was hostile, and the customers in the shop couldn't help chiming in. "If we don't want them, we don't want them. Speak politely. Your voice is too loud, you scared this comrade here. Did someone knock over the vinegar barrel at home?" The middle-aged woman didn't argue with the customers, but sounds of things being thrown around came from the kitchen. Xia Xiaolan understood what had happened. This lady was probably the shop owner's wife. She had thought the owner was very sincere when he bought the eels from her last time. She hadn't expected that the owner's wife would have a mishap with a vinegar barrel. Xia Xiaolan was wronged but didn't want to argue with the owner's wife. If she did, she might not be able to do business in this area in the future. Poor Xia Xiaolan couldn't catch a break. She maintained her composure, although her expression changed frequently. As she pushed her bicycle to leave, the owner of the noodle shop came running after her, saying, "I'm really sorry about that. My husband can be unreasonable. We can't buy your goods anymore, but I have a relative who handles procurement at the Municipal Party Committee guest house. His name is Hu Yongkai. If you're willing to give it a try, just say that Hu Zhuliang recommended you." Hu, the shop owner, looked embarrassed. His wife had humiliated Xia Xiaolan in public. It was rare for someone not to hold a grudge, but they also didn't want to push her too far. The Municipal Party Committee guest house, an official place, wasn't easy to deal with. However, if she could make it work, it could be a long-term business relationship. "Thank you, Hu. I appreciate it." Xia Xiaolan expressed her gratitude, and Hu Zhuliang didn't linger as his wife was causing a scene back at the shop. Xia Xiaolan didn't immediately head to the Municipal Party Committee guest house. She had heard that, despite its grandiose name, the guesthouse was located in the outskirts of the city rather than in the city center. She wondered what the city leaders were thinking when they built it so far away. Instead, she decided to return to the previous agricultural market to sell her goods. She arrived early, and the market was bustling with people. After paying the management fee, she was allocated a small space. Xia Xiaolan set up her sign, and people started approaching her to buy. Her distinctive appearance made her memorable, and some of the customers remembered her. Some asked why her partner wasn't there, and Xia Xiaolan responded to these questions with a smile. "Can you give a discount on the eels?" "Sure, it's a whole pound." "I'll make sure you get a full pound." Business started booming. Customers surrounded Xia Xiaolan, speaking all at once, wanting their purchases weighed and paying her. Some bought eggs, some bought eels. For those who were a bit slower to react, it was easy to get confused, and Xia Xiaolan was kept busy for 2 hours. By the end, her clothes were soaked with sweat. Most of the goods she sold were for personal consumption, and there weren't many bulk purchases. She had over 100 eggs and over 20 pounds of eels left. Selling retail every day carried its risks, so she wanted to find someone who could buy in larger quantities. That's when she remembered what Hu had said about his relative, Hu Yongkai, who handled procurement at the Municipal Party Committee guest house. A person in charge of procurement at the Municipal Party Committee guest house might not be able to buy a large quantity, but they could likely introduce her to other buyers in the field. The 1980s were a time when personal connections mattered a lot, so if she could establish a connection through Hu, it might open up more opportunities. Xia Xiaolan was prepared to use the sales techniques she had honed in the future to influence comrade Hu Yongkai. When it came to giving gifts, there were some rules. When giving gifts to male comrades, cigarettes and alcohol were always a safe choice. Among alcoholic beverages, Maotai and Wuliangya were the most prestigious. Leaving the prices aside, both of these premium liquors were rationed to officials. Xia Xiaolan couldn't even get her hands on a bottle of liquor. Then there were the cigarettes produced by the Xanadu cigarette factory, Huangjini, Sanhua, and Kaidai. Huangjini was considered a B-grade cigarette smoked by lower-ranking smokers. Sanhua was a top-quality A-grade cigarette used for official meetings and by leaders. Kaidai fell somewhere in between. Even though it was an A-grade cigarette, it was priced at 3 renminbi and 50 cents per pack, and Xia Xiaolan thought it would be suitable for gifting to Hu Yongcai's relative. However, reality hit her like a slap in the face when she heard that she needed to buy at least 2 packs of Kaidai, and she would be required to get an official receipt for them. Chapter 32, The Municipal Party Committee Guest House. Kaidai isn't produced by the Xanadu cigarette factory, is it? Is it out of stock? At only 3 renminbi and 50 cents per pack, Xia Xiaolan could certainly afford it. She might have knowledge beyond her time, but she had no understanding of the cigarette market in 1983. Tobacco was a state monopoly. Take Kaidai, for example. The Xanadu cigarette factory had an annual production quota for how many Kaidai cigarettes they could make, and not all of these cigarettes were sold in Xanadu City or even within the province. They were distributed to various regions across the country. So, Kaidai cigarettes produced by the Xanadu cigarette factory were challenging for Xanadu residents to purchase. If they wanted to buy it, they had to have connections and be prepared to pay a premium. Xanadu residents found it difficult to buy even 1 or 2 packs of Kaidai cigarettes, and they certainly couldn't purchase them by the carton. Except in special circumstances, such as government meetings, with special approval from leaders, could they purchase such sought-after cigarettes by the carton. Still want to buy cigarettes? The sales clerk brought her back to reality, and Xia Xiaolan nodded, saying, "Then give me a pack of Dakiaman." They had Dakiaman, but Xia Xiaolan didn't have a cigarette coupon. Priced at 3 renminbi and 50 cents per pack, a pack of Dakiaman cigarettes cost her 50 cents extra. This was because Dakiaman had a large production volume, otherwise, she wouldn't have even had a chance to buy it. It took a while for Xia Xiaolan to calm down after buying the cigarettes. Yes, the tobacco business was incredibly profitable, but she needed to find a way in. It wasn't just a private trade, it required having the right official connections. Xia Xiaolan couldn't achieve that in the short term, but it didn't mean she couldn't eventually get to know these influential individuals. She decided to start by building her network with this Hu Yongkai. Her original goal was to find a buyer for the eels, but it didn't mean she could only sell eels. Xia Xiaolan rode her bicycle westward. The western outskirts of the city were once barren land. However, after the 1950s, large industrial factories, such as those producing cotton, grinding wheels, coal machinery, and textiles, were established in Xanadu's western suburbs. The Xanadu City Committee decided to construct a new office building in the western suburbs. As the location for office work shifted, they decided to build a new municipal party committee guest house. The guest house building was completed in 1963, and after 20 years, it still maintained its appearance well. The 5-story building was surrounded by a colonnade, and its eaves extended outward, giving the building an elegant and delicate appearance. The top was adorned with glazed tiles and carvings, making the entire structure grand and beautifully arranged. This place has been developing for 2 or 3 decades, and it's not as desolate as Xia Xiaolan expected. However, locals still call it the western suburbs to distinguish it from the old city area. Of course, it doesn't have the hustle and bustle of a street full of snacks and a farmer's market. The people who come to the municipal party committee guest house are either attending meetings or on official business. They are all regular employees of various units and government staff. Xia Xiaolan rode her bicycle here without an introduction letter and was dressed like a peasant. The guest house didn't explicitly refuse entry to peasants, but without an introduction letter, there was no hope of eating or staying here. It was simply impossible. Xia Xiaolan explained that she had come to visit her relative, and the guesthouse staff instructed her to wait at the back door. After a while, a man in his 30s, a bit short but otherwise quite similar to anyone you would see in this era, came out of the back door. He was on the heavier side. Everyone had no extra money in their pockets in 1983. It was a time with more skinny people and fewer overweight ones. It's no wonder he was in charge of procurement at the municipal party committee guest house. He had a cushy job. With a plump face, his eyes looked small. Hu Yongkai widened his small eyes in surprise. He couldn't fathom when he had gained this extra relative. Xia Xiaolan was not about to let him ponder over it. She said, "I'm Xia Xiaolan, and your uncle Zhuliang sent me to find you." Although he didn't meet Hu Zhuliang often, Hu Yongkai held a bit of power, and he was worried that someone might come to ask for help without reason. Xia Xiaolan quickly handed him the bag and said, "I have a little favor to ask, brother Hu." Hu Yongkai took one look at the contents of the bag, and his eyebrows twitched. What was the big deal? She was giving him a whole pack of Dakiaman cigarettes? His initial reaction was to decline, but Xia Xiaolan didn't let him speculate. She directly explained the matter of purchasing eels and how she needed his help. "If you think it's feasible, I can bring some samples." She really had the nerve to say that. Were those really samples, or were they just leftovers from the farmer's market? Hu Yongkai had a pretty good idea of what was going on. Buying some goods wasn't a big deal, but Xia Xiaolan had gone out of her way and given a significant gift. It wasn't just about 20-odd pounds of eels. How much could one earn from that? It wasn't worth using a pack of Dakiamen to build connections. Trying to give face to Hu Zhuliang and taking into account the pack of Dakiamen, Hu Yongkai told Xia Xiaolan the truth. He said, "You see, the guest house isn't small, but it doesn't consume many ingredients like eels. Those who come here are either attending meetings or on official business, and they all follow the standard of 1 renminbi per day for meals. What you brought this time, I can take, but we simply can't consume this much every day." The guest house had its own meal standards, whether it was accommodating accommodations for leaders of various levels in Xanadu or serving as the venue for major government meetings organized by the Xanadu City Government and Municipal Party Committee. Regardless of the level of the officials who came, they all had the same meal standards, 1 renminbi per person per day, with those eating only needing to submit a pound of grain coupons. With 1 renminbi, it was certain that the main course was quite substantial, including meat and vegetables. However, it couldn't be eels every day. Xia Xiaolan wasn't disappointed. Hu Yongkai had an agenda in mind, and she knew that. With Hu Yongcai's experience, it wasn't just about the volume of eels she had brought, it was about what would happen in a few days. Xia Xiaolan said, "All right, I understand." Hu Yongkai had a good impression of Xia Xiaolan. She had been generous, and she was also pretty. He said, "Uncle Zhuliang is older than me. You don't need to address me so formally, just call me by my name." Xia Xiaolan immediately went along with it, "All right, brother Hu." Hu Yongcai's eyes squinted into a smile, and he said, "You wait here, and I'll have someone come out to weigh them." Chapter 33, Women Have 2 Chances at Rebirth. Hu Yongkai didn't mention buying Xia Xiaolan's eggs. It wasn't that he was stingy, the guest house simply couldn't guarantee the quantity of eels needed every day. While eggs were a staple, people at the guest house weren't ordinary citizens who had to buy expensive eggs. If Hu Yongkai bought Xia Xiaolan's eggs, it wouldn't be to help her make money, it would actually make her lose money. 20-odd pounds of eels, Hu Yongkai could easily lift them, but he didn't want them to be wet and fishy. He called a young man from the kitchen to help. The young comrade didn't dare to stare at Xia Xiaolan for too long. He weighed the eels, which came to 24 pounds. Hu Yongkai calculated the price to be 1 renminbi and 21 cents per pound, the same as Xia Xiaolan's retail price. This showed the power of 1 pack of Dakiamen. With these 24 pounds of eels, Xia Xiaolan could easily make a profit of 9 renminbi, which was more than enough to buy cigarettes. In this day and age, there were few people who actively seized opportunities, and Xia Xiaolan had the chance because of it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have had the opportunity to connect with Hu Yongkai. Hu Yongkai said, "All right, go back safely. Bring another 20 pounds of eels the day after tomorrow. Whether you need more or less, I'll inform you in time." It seemed that Hu Yongkai had set the purchasing frequency at 20 pounds every 2 days, averaging 10 pounds a day. Over the course of a month, Xia Xiaolan could make a stable profit of nearly 100 renminbi. Her smile became even warmer. She said, "I understand, brother Hu. Goodbye." She left on her bicycle, and the young comrade Hu Yongkai had called to help with the eels stared after her, asking, "Brother Hu, is she really your relative?" Hu Yongkai shot him a glance and said, "Do you think my family's ancestral tomb has suddenly produced such a fresh relative? I'm making an official procurement. Don't spread rumors." The young comrade chuckled awkwardly, "Brother Hu, I didn't mean that. I just think this female comrade is really beautiful. Our female attendants at the guest house can't compare to her." Hu Yongkai thought to himself, "What do you know? The female attendants at the Municipal Party Committee guest house are all top-notch beauties, but they have dignified and elegant beauty that is universally accepted. From a man's perspective, someone like Xia Xiaolan is absolutely the most attractive. However, with her appearance, who would dare to hire her as a service attendant at the guest house? It would be too tempting, and it could lead to leadership making mistakes. A woman's beauty is not enough, she must be able to seize her two chances at rebirth. One is the real rebirth, and the other is getting married. For example, Xia Xiaolan, who seemed to have a plan. In a city as large as Xanadu, she specifically came to the municipal party committee guest house to sell her products. She frequently appeared in this area, which was frequented by all kinds of leadership and cadres. If she managed to turn her life around and become prosperous, it was a possibility. Xia Xiaolan didn't know how Hu Yongkai viewed her, and as long as there was business, it didn't really matter how he judged her. She quietly peddled her wares along the road, and when she saw potential customers by the roadside, she proactively approached them, asking if they needed eggs. After making a full circle of Xanadu City, she finally managed to sell all the remaining 100 or so eggs. No matter how careful she was, some eggs would inevitably break without foam or plastic egg trays for protection. However, Xia Xiaolan had decided not to continue selling eggs. Eggs had become a secondary commodity, and this thought made her feel much more at ease. At home, they had a lot of loaches and crucian carp. Li Fengmei had planted quite a few radishes and green vegetables in their private plot of land. Xia Xiaolan made another round, and besides pork, she wasn't sure what vegetables to buy. So, she decided to buy more meat. In the afternoon, the meat stall only had lean meat left. Actually, lean meat was quite delicious. Xia Xiaolan had initially eaten sweet potatoes for a couple of days, and later, when she stayed at the Liu family's house, they had good food standards. She didn't feel as deprived of oil and water. Xia Xiaolan bought 2 pounds of meat and a few seasonings. Her aunt, Li Fengmei, was decent at cooking, but their home-cooked meals were mainly seasoned with salt and vinegar. At most, they added some homegrown scallions, ginger, and garlic. They didn't have ingredients like star anise, Sichuan peppercorns, or bay leaves. Xia Xiaolan decided to bring some of these seasonings. Once she was full, she began to pursue flavors. Within her means, Xia Xiaolan was trying to improve her quality of life, because that would give her more motivation to continue making money. Running to Xanadu every other day was the right approach. Xia Xiaolan made over 20 renminbi that day, and she was feeling quite content when she arrived back in Qijing village. As soon as she parked her bicycle, Lu Yong brought her some good news. Liangshan village's Zhang Erlai has been criminally detained, and he's likely to get a heavy sentence. Xia Xiaolan had been selling goods in Xanadu, and during the day, Lu Yong had gone to Anqing County. The 3 ruffians not being sentenced was a cause for concern. However, he couldn't just let them go. As it turned out, today Anqing County had intensified its crackdown on public disturbances, parading around various criminals with signs and loudspeakers. Lu Yong happened to encounter this crackdown. He didn't know Zhang Erlai, but the sign in front of the person said they were from Liangshan village, which only matched Zhang Erlai. Lu Yong had wanted to deal with him a long time ago, and the recent crackdown was quite severe. He also didn't want to involve familiar friends. But it seemed he didn't need to take any action, because Zhang Erlai had already been arrested. Xia Xiaolan was not happy at all. That guy had twice attempted to assault the original host. The first time, Wang Jianhua had saved her, and the second time, he had fueled the rumors that led to the original host's suicide. Xia Xiaolan had never engaged in any inappropriate behavior with Zhang Erlai. However, the rumors and gossip were so convincing that anyone would have doubts. She asked, what was he arrested for? Xia Xiaolan was feeling quite uneasy. If it was related to his conduct and if Zhang Erlai tried to drag her into it, what would she do? In 1983, during the anti-crime campaign, they were cracking down on both men and women involved in improper relationships. Some young women were executed for this crime. Would she have to go to the hospital for a medical examination to prove her innocence? Lu Yong, with his dark and slender eyebrows, relaxed and said, "Burglary." The police station says the stolen amount was significant, so he's definitely going to get a heavy sentence. Chapter 34, Li Fengmei's Brainwashing Skills. Burglary with a significant amount stolen were the two key points that made Xia Xiaolan heave a sigh of relief. Why would he dare to commit such a crime at a time like this? He was practically seeking death. Xia Xiaolan wasn't worried that the perpetrator would make baseless accusations against her. Did Zhang Erlai think his charges weren't severe enough, and he had to drag her into it? This news brought joy to the whole family, especially to Lu Fen, a person who had become accustomed to being obedient and submissive. They all hoped that Zhang Erlai would be sentenced to death, or at the very least, receive a lengthy prison term. Gradually, no one would bring up Xia Xiaolan's reputation anymore. The police are doing a good job. These bad people should all be arrested, Lu Fen said, wiping her tears. Lu Fen was an honest person who had become accustomed to accepting things as they came. She hoped that Zhang Erlai would receive the harshest punishment. Even if he wasn't sentenced to death, a sentence of 10 or 20 years would ensure that nobody would talk about Xia Xiaolan anymore. Future regrets will show that I believe in Xia Xiaolan, Li Fengmei said privately to her younger sister. If she doesn't go to college, she'll be no less capable than her cousin, Xia Ziyu. The Xia family only supports Xia Ziyu and belittles Xia Xiaolan. This is the power of a female college student status. Li Fengmei also believed that the Xia family would eventually come for Xia Xiaolan. She spent her days brainwashing Lu Fen and would ensure that Lu Fen didn't get scared when Xia Dajuan arrived. Li Fengmei said, if you don't support Xiaolan, the Xia family will bully her even more. Li Fengmei didn't particularly like Lu Fen before. She was her younger sister, but Lu Fen was nearly the same age as her. Lu Yong had only found a wife when he was in his 30s, and Li Fengmei was his second wife. At that time, Lu Fen had already gotten married. The two sisters hadn't interacted much and had no emotional connection. Before, Lu Yong used to secretly help Lu Fen. Life was tough for everyone, and Li Fengmei didn't say anything, but she felt uneasy inside. Lu Fen was reserved and didn't know how to get on Li Fengmei's good side. Having a daughter with eyes on top of her head didn't help. Li Fengmei liked Lu Fen and her daughter. But she only pretended to like them when Lu Yong was around. She met with her in-laws a couple of times a year to maintain the appearance of family harmony. Lu Yong suddenly brought his sister and niece from the Xia family to their home, and Li Fengmei had reservations about it. She didn't want to create a rift between husband and wife. However, this was partly because Lu Yong had been earning more money recently. He had been away a lot in the past 6 months, always giving Li Fengmei a substantial amount of money. The family's finances had improved, and it was easier to feed a couple more mouths. If they were still in dire straits, even if it harmed the marital relationship, Li Fengmei wouldn't have allowed Xia Xiaolan and her daughter to stay. Xia Xiaolan and her daughter were not freeloaders, though. Lu Fen took over many household chores, and Xia Xiaolan was generous. She had the ability to earn money and was willing to spend it on her family. Xia Xiaolan and her daughter had been living in Lu's house for less than half a month, but Li Fengmei had finally started to treat them as her own family. When it comes to family, it's important to say some heartfelt words. Li Fengmei also knew that Xia Xiaolan was ambitious and wouldn't spend her whole life living with her uncle's family. With her ability to earn money at such a rate, there was a good chance she could settle in the city of Xanadu or even buy a house in the county. The only person dragging them down was Lu Fen. Everyone was afraid she might be too soft-hearted. If Xia Dajuan arrived and she ran back to her parents' house to endure humiliation and mistreatment, then no matter how capable Xia Xiaolan was, she would still have a vulnerable spot that the Xia family could exploit. Li Fengmei saw how Lu Fen treated her own mother poorly. A daughter who wasn't even respectful to her own mother, how could one expect her to treat her maternal uncle's family well in the future? Li Fengmei nodded as she washed the dishes. The mother and daughter had endured a lot at the Xia family's home. With so many mouths to feed and fields to tend to, they shouldn't be going hungry. However, the Xia family's tradition was to keep all three sons under one roof due to filial piety. The management of all the land and harvests was in the hands of Xia Laotai. After handing over the public grain tax, she decided how the remaining grain would be distributed. With 13 people in the Xia family, there were only 4 actual laborers. Xia Laotai was a widow who had raised her 3 sons on her own, so she didn't have to work in the fields. The eldest son, Xia Changxing, had a son and a daughter. His daughter was Xia Ziyu, who spent most of her time in the county and was known as a good student. Xia Laotai didn't allow her beloved granddaughter to work, as it would interfere with her studies. Xia Changxing's wife, Zhang Cui, had received Xia Laotai's permission to go to the county to take care of Xia Ziyu. The second son of Xia Laotai's family was only 10 years old and couldn't help much with the labor. The third son, Xia Hongbing, had 3 children. His eldest daughter, Xia Hongxia, was 17 years old and had quit school after finishing junior high. She stayed at home, cooking and feeding the chickens with her mother, Wang Jinggue. She also didn't do heavy work. Her 2 younger brothers were still small, and the older one hadn't graduated from elementary school yet. The younger one was the same age as Tao Tao. What kind of labor force were they? Only the second son's family had both husband and wife as essential labor. Lu Fen, despite being a woman, worked just as hard as a man and couldn't avoid the most laborious and strenuous tasks. Yet, every time Xia Laotai distributed resources, Lu Fen's family received the least. When Xia Ziyu passed the college entrance examination, Xia Laotai called the 3 families together to ask for living expenses. She openly stated that Xia Xiaolan's family had fewer mouths to feed, which was less of a burden, and since they had no sons to establish their own families, Xia Dajuan should contribute more. Xia Dajuan, true to his word, emptied his pockets and handed over 300 yuan. All the harvest from the fields had been handed over to the government. Xia Dajuan earned this money by doing odd jobs. Lu Fen thought about it and her eyes welled up with tears. If Xia Ziyu went to college and her daughter didn't have to get married, and their savings were all gone, they couldn't even afford a few new quilts, wash basins, and kettles. What kind of decent family could they talk about? These were issues Lu Fen hadn't dared to think deeply about before. It was related to her many years of suffering and submission. Under the constant influence of Li Fengmei, she felt that it wasn't fair. Xia Ziyu had her own father, and to send her to study in the capital city, her biological father had contributed only a bit more than 100 yuan. If she followed Xia Dajuan back and continued to work hard for the Xia family, using her hard-earned money to support someone else's daughter while her own daughter lay in bed, seriously ill and unable to afford medical care, was that right? Lu Fen wiped her tears with the back of her hand and said firmly, "Sister-in-law, I won't go back to the Xia family." Chapter 35, The Xia Family's Family Meeting. As Lu Fen declared that she wouldn't return to the Xia family was coincidentally discussing the situation of Lu Fen and her daughter. The Xia family had over 10 members, with plenty of land but a shortage of labor. The three brothers, who worked tirelessly on the embankment day and night, returned home to face the challenges of the farming season without any rest. There was no break in between, and their ironclad bodies couldn't bear the strain. With the absence of Lu Fen, who worked the hardest and ate the least, it was as if they had lost their most productive workhorse. Even Zhang Cui, who had barely worked for the past few years, had to go into the fields. Wang Jinggue, from the third son's family, couldn't slack off either. Xia Laotai and Xia Hongxia were responsible for cooking at home and looking after the children, and the entire family was exhausted after storing all the grains. Everyone felt that this year's farming season was particularly tough. Xia Ziyu had taken away the family's savings, and the money the three brothers had earned from fixing the embankment was sent to Xia Ziyu. The Xia family's public account was nearly empty, and this year's autumn harvest didn't have much meat or fish. Their bellies were empty, and they didn't have the strength to work. Finally, after they had stored the grain, the Xia family could gather for a family meeting to discuss the situation of Xia Xiaolan and her daughter. Xia Laotai had a worried expression on her face as she asked, "Dajuan, what do you think? They've been at Lu's house for so long, and they don't come back during the busy farming season. It's like they don't consider themselves part of the Xia family. Can we continue living like this?" Xia Laotai had her own wisdom about life, and she wore different masks in front of different people. In front of her beloved granddaughter Xia Ziyu, she was a kind and generous grandmother. Of course, Xia Laotai hadn't always been so fond of Xia Ziyu. She had a rural mindset of valuing sons over daughters, and her most beloved were her three grandsons. Xia Ziyu suddenly became wise after finishing junior high school, and every word she said and every action she took could touch Xia Laotai's heart. She was studying hard with a promising future, and gradually, Xia Laotai's favoritism shifted, even to the point where her grandsons ranked ahead of her eldest granddaughter in her eyes. In front of her second son's wife and the disgraced Xia Xiaolan, she was a harsh and demanding mother-in-law. Not squeezing Lu Fen and the others at the bottom of the Xia family hierarchy, how could she establish the unwavering authority of Xia Laotai, who never went back on her word? In front of her son, especially in front of her strong but not very clever second son, Xia Laotai was a considerate mother. She wasn't a typical oppressive mother-in-law, but whatever harsh things she did, she could always justify them as being for Xia Dajuan's benefit and for the good of the entire Xia family. Her deep maternal concern revolved around the idea that Xia Dajuan didn't have any sons to carry on the family line, and she worried that the frivolous Xia Xiaolan wouldn't find a husband. That's why she allowed Xia Dajuan to treat the promising Xia Ziyu better and made sure that Lu Fen, who couldn't give birth to sons, did more work, so both husband and wife contributed more to the Xia family. In her mind, this would make her nephews more respectful towards them, at least in the eyes of Xia Dajuan. She was this kind of figure. Xia Dajuan knew what Lu Fen had endured at home. It was something he had gotten used to, and he believed that Lu Fen could endure it. He also felt that not taking Xia Xiaolan to the hospital was a bit excessive, but the family truly had no money. That stubborn girl was too willful, wanting to grab anything she saw. She had ruined her reputation, and no one in the family could even say two words about it. The more generous Xia Ziyu was, the more Xia Xiaolan should show a little bit of an apologetic attitude. These were all thoughts in Xia Dajuan's mind, but on the day Xia Xiaolan held scissors to her neck and insisted on leaving the Xia family, Lu Fen, for the first time, fiercely pushed him aside. Xia Dajuan couldn't help but wonder if he had done something wrong. The rush to harvest the rice grains had left Xia Dajuan physically exhausted, and the family meeting after storing the grain left him speechless. When Xia Xiaolan asked if they could continue living like this, Xia Dajuan felt that his dignity had been trampled upon. Unable to have a son, he was already the subject of ridicule in the countryside. Could he not even be the master of his wife and child at home? He said, "I'll have them, mother and daughter, come back to apologize to you." In this family meeting, the younger generation of the Xia family was absent. Xia Hongxia was eavesdropping from outside the window, and she was infuriated by the fact that her second uncle wanted Xia Xiaolan and them to come back. Why did Xia Xiaolan get to be so arrogant? She didn't even have proper looks and wasn't even qualified to compare to her elder sister. The issue at hand was her marriage. Xia Hongxia refused to admit it, but when she said that Xia Xiaolan wasn't good-looking, she was actually envious of her looks. Xia Dajuan's words left the Xia family members in silence, and they could all tell that he wanted to continue living together. He didn't have any plans to change wives for the time being. Wang Jingui was a bit anxious. She didn't mind if Orphaned came back, but Xia Xiaolan couldn't return and tarnish her daughter's reputation. If she spoke, her husband Xia Hongbing would glare at her. Zhang Chui gently tugged at Xia Changxing's sleeve, and he nodded with his eldest brother's tone, saying, "In a family, there will always be conflicts. Let's have Xia Xiaolan come back and apologize to her grandmother. We are still a family. This girl really doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. Let's not even mention her reputation outside. She has angered her grandmother." Xia Dajuan knew that his mother had relented, and his heart instantly settled. He agreed readily, "I'll go to Lu's house tomorrow to bring them back. I'll make her write a letter of apology to Ziyu and keep writing until Ziyu forgives her." Zhang Chui knew that it was her turn to step in now, and Xia Dajuan had always respected her as the eldest sister-in-law. Ziyu hasn't blamed her, but Xiaolan's personality, even if she stays at Lu's house, it might cause trouble for them. It's better to bring her back and guide her properly. She's still young, and with good teaching, she'll come around. Having dealt with the good-hearted side, Wang Jingui was very dissatisfied and said, "With her staying at home, who would dare to come and propose to my daughter? Big sister-in-law, should we let Ziyu introduce a college student to Hongxia?" As she said the second part of the sentence, Wang Jingui's eyes flickered with anticipation. Zhang Chui's eyelid twitched. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Let Xia Ziyu introduce a college student to Hongxia? Were college students that valuable these days? Xia Hongxia was the least attractive of the three sisters, hadn't even finished junior high school, and had a rural hukou that didn't allow her to find work. Only someone with poor eyesight would agree to be with Xia Hongxia. Alright, enough of this nonsense. If Dajuan wants to continue living this life, we'll go to Lu's house tomorrow to bring them back. Lu Yong was not easy to deal with, and Xia Xiaolan had deliberately made Xia Dajuan go face the music. However, Xia Changxing was not very tactful as he said, "I'll go with Dajuan tomorrow." Seeing her mother-in-law's disapproval clearly written on her face, Zhang Chui quickly added, "I'll go with Dajuan. You men are too rigid in your way of speaking, and it's easy to ruin things." Xia Dajuan, with a grateful look in his eyes, turned to his eldest sister-in-law. Wang Jingui rolled her eyes and said, "I'll go too. With my help and that of my big sister-in-law, we'll bring back the second sister-in-law."